Welcome to Protecting Personal Information and Personal Health Information when working off-site. This presentation is based on a Manitoba Ombudsman practice note with the same title and is available on our website at www.ombudsman.mb.ca. In this video, we'll go over the definition of personal information, or PI, and personal health information, or PHI. We'll explore what working off-site might look like for some people. We'll discuss who is responsible for protecting PI and PHI, and why is it so important that we need a practice note and a presentation about the topic. Finally, we'll talk about the best practices when working off-site, such as how to establish which records may and may never be removed from the worksite, how you can ensure that you're only taking what you need when working off-site, and how to protect the information that is removed. So let's get started. What is the definition of personal information? PI is defined by the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, or FEPA, as recorded information about an identifiable individual that includes, but is not limited to, information such as an individual's telephone number, email address, ancestry, occupation, financial circumstances, criminal history, personal views or opinions, unless they're about another person, views or opinions expressed about the individual by another person, and an identifying number or symbol. Personal health information is defined under the Personal Health Information Act as recorded information about individuals, their health and healthcare, and includes someone's name, address, and phone number, information about health, healthcare history, and family history, information about the provision of care, someone's personal health identification number, and information about payment for healthcare. PHI is generally considered the most sensitive type of information, and FEA recognizes that confidentiality of this information must be protected so that individuals are not afraid to seek healthcare or to disclose sensitive information to their healthcare providers. Let's take a look at what working off-site might look like for some people. Working off-site might mean that you're working from home, or visiting a client at their home. Working off-site can also occur if you're traveling to other work locations. For example, your organization might have offices in Winnipeg, Brandon, and Thompson, and you might find yourself taking PI and PHI when traveling between offices. Considerations for protecting PI and PHI should also be made when attending off-site meetings. If you find yourself taking PI and PHI off-site, do you know who is responsible for protecting that information? Well, it's important to remember that PI and PHI of individuals, like clients, patients, students, and employees, is entrusted to the care of the public body and trustee, so all employees have a collective responsibility for protecting this information. Let's now look at why protecting PI and PHI is so important. Well, it's the law. Public bodies and trustees are required to make reasonable safeguards to protect personal information and personal health information of individuals under Section 41 of FIPA and Sections 18 and 19 of FEA. And it's important because information is more vulnerable to privacy breaches when taken off-site. In 2016, our office conducted a survey about privacy breaches involving PI and PHI, and we looked at the types of breaches experienced by trustees and public bodies. From the choices given, what do you think was the most reported privacy breach? A. Lost flash drive. B. Stolen computer. C. Lost file or paper record. Or D. Stolen cell phone. The answer is C. Lost file or paper record. Of the 118 public bodies and trustees that completed the survey, 59% indicated that they experienced breaches involving the loss of paper records. For all types of records that were lost or stolen, 29% reported that incidents occurred in a public location, such as a park, restaurant, or street, and 26% reported that records were lost or stolen from a vehicle. These are examples of failure to safeguard information when taking it off-site. The failure to safeguard PI or PHI is magnified if you carry more PI or PHI than is actually required. We mentioned that safeguards are required under FIPA and FIA, but what does that involve? Some guard dogs and sharks? A few crocodiles? Well, no. Safeguards include creating policies that set out procedures for ensuring the security of the information. You might wonder, how does an organization create effective policies and procedures for working off-site? Well, not all workplaces are going to have the same needs, so there isn't a one-size-fits-all option. In order to be effective, policies and procedures should meet the unique needs of a workplace. Also, since we live in a fast-paced world when it comes to technology and what's available to us, it's important that policies and procedures are reviewed periodically to ensure that they're up to date. And of course, policies and procedures for working off-site are only effective if they're communicated regularly to employees. In this next section of the video, we'll go over the best practices that should be considered when a public body or trustee is establishing or reviewing its policies and procedures for removing PI and PHI. When it comes to records, it's important to recognize that not all records are the same. Different records pose different levels of risk if the record is lost, stolen, or accidentally disclosed. A public body and trustee should identify which categories of records and types of information may or should never be removed from the workplace. Now, how do you make that determination? This risk rating overview example was taken from our practice note called Key Steps in Responding to Privacy Breaches. This information can be used proactively when developing or reviewing your policies to help determine what records are not permitted to be removed or to determine what safeguards should be in place for those records that are taken off-site. Now, this chart provides an example of how to assess a risk, and it's important to emphasize that every public body and trustee must make their own risk assessment given their unique circumstances. When you are considering taking PI and PHI off-site, how do you know if you're taking too much information? A few questions that you can ask are, do I even need to take this information? It's best practice to only take PI and PHI off-site when it's necessary to accomplish the task. Also ask yourself, how much of this information do I need for the task? In other words, take the least amount of information that is necessary to accomplish the task. And consider whether you can take copies. If so, remember to clearly identify the copies and only keep them for as long as necessary. If possible, de-identify PI and PHI on the copies that you take off-site and redact any other information that is not needed. And don't forget to track the records that are taken off-site. Tracking who took what record, when the record was taken off-site, and when it was returned is a good habit to get into. You have now reached a point where you know what you're taking off-site. So how do you make sure that you're keeping that information secure? Here are some best practices for keeping information secure and what to avoid doing. Best practices include transporting information in a secure manner. A locked briefcase or suitcase is a good option. Also, always keeping the information with you and under your control when you're off-site. This includes during meals, breaks, and travel. If you're storing information at home, make sure you're storing it securely. If you have a locked cabinet, that's a good option, but if not, you can use your locked briefcase or suitcase. And if you're using email, ensure that the information you're receiving or sending is password protected or encrypted. Things to avoid doing include leaving the information unattended in a vehicle, even in the trunk. Although it's tempting to do a quick stop at a grocery store, don't do it. Remember our survey? Many breaches have occurred when information is left in vehicles, and locking the doors or trunk is not a reasonable safeguard. If you're staying in a hotel room, make sure you don't leave the information unsecured, because hotel employees do have access to your room. So consider leaving the information at a local site of your organization or in a hotel safe. Also, remember to be aware of your surroundings when in public, like at an airport or restaurant. If you have to view PI or PHI in public, make sure that you take precautions to ensure that no one else can see the information. And always avoid discussing PI and PHI in public. Take a moment and reflect. How many of these do you use on a daily basis? Whether we like it or not, technology has become an essential part of our lives, both personally and professionally. When using technology for work purposes, how can you make sure that the information stored on a mobile device or a storage device is secure? We have some tips for you. There are information technology tools that can help ensure that information on laptops, mobile phones, USB sticks, and so on are secured. Some examples are encryption technologies, privacy screens, and secure virtual private networks. An organization should identify for its employees which tools it approves for use, and make sure that those tools are available for employees. Remember, tools won't work if employees can't access them. Organizations should also remember that not all employees will have the same knowledge when it comes to technology, so it's important to provide training on the use of the tools that it approves for use. When it comes to passwords and encryption, it's best practice to use both for mobile and storage devices. Let's talk a bit about passwords now. With so many websites and devices requiring passwords these days, it's easy to get password fatigue. But we all have to remind ourselves to make sure each and every password we use is unique, complex, and long. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, or OPC, has good password tips on its website. For instance, the OPC suggests using a phrase to remember your password. The example it provides is using the phrase, "I always play tennis with two friends on Thursdays at 4, period," to remember the password LAPTW2FOTA4, period. Other password tips from the OPC include: avoid obvious choices or a reference someone else could guess. For example, the name of your dog. Make passwords 8 or more characters long. Use different passwords for different websites, accounts, and devices. Change the default or factory passwords. Allow multi-factor authentication where possible. Don't share your passwords. Use the automatic lock features. Don't use the remember password feature. Automatic logins are convenient but risky if you share a computer. And if you're using a password manager, do your research to find one that you can trust. Finally, if you need to write down passwords, keep them offline in a secure place. There are other best practices that you can use to protect PI and PHI when you take it off-site, such as setting electronic devices to automatically lock or log off after a brief period of time, logging off or shutting down laptops or tablets when not using them, storing electronic devices and removable storage securely when not in use, and transferring or deleting PI and PHI from electronic devices and removable storage as soon as the information is no longer required in that medium for the immediate future. I know this is a lot of information, but remember, you got this. So, what if your organization approves the use of a personal device? Best practices when using a personal device include making sure no PI or PHI is saved or stored on your device. Using a password with those great OPC tips. Making sure your device locks after a period of inactivity. Logging off or shutting down the device when not using it. And making sure you're not connected to an unsecured Wi-Fi network. But what if the dreaded B word, breach, happens to you? If you're in a situation where PI or PHI is lost, stolen, or otherwise compromised, immediately notify your supervisor and your access and privacy coordinator or access and privacy officer. These individuals know what steps to take to contain a breach and mitigate any risks. And if you're interested in looking at our privacy breach resources, feel free to follow the link on your screen. We also have other great resources on our webpage, like practice notes and guidelines, investigation reports, brochures, and fact sheets. The privacy breach resources that were discussed earlier on can also be located here. We also have our live links to Twitter, Facebook, and our YouTube channel. Thank you for listening. We hope this video has provided you with information that you find useful when you work off-site.